First, there was the fighting man, the magic user, and the cleric. Then, Gygax introduced the thief, and it all went to hell. Hey, I'm James, and I'm a sweaty mess from shoveling a crap ton of snow this morning. No, there is nothing clever for me to say here. I'm ready to go back to bed now. But I'm here to dork out about dungeons and designs on Crumbling Keeps, the Dungeon Dork. You'll have to excuse me for this pronunciation, but there's an old common law principle called expressio unius es exclusio alterius, which translates basically into the expression of one thing is the exclusion of the other. When Dungeons and Dragons first started, back in the very beginning, there were but three classes, a far cry from what we have today. The fighting man, who would later simply be called the fighter, the magic user, who would mostly be called the wizard, and the cleric, who will always and forever be called the cleric. But players, even when the game first came out, wanted more. Across the nation, game clubs tinkered with their own classes, many of which would make their way into Dungeons and Dragons canon through a network of fanzines and letters to Gygax, which he pillaged from. There's some debate on the ethics of how D&D grew and what was sourced from fans, but we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about thief skills and what they meant to the game and what they continue to mean to this day. Hide in shadows, move silently, pickpocket. These were some of the skills given to the first thief. Because Gygax loved subsystems, they weren't handled like anything else in the game. They were percentile rolls. You had to roll a D100 under your percentage chance to successfully do a skill. Which is all well and good and a lot of fun, but suddenly you have this character that could specifically do those above mentioned skills. You had a character that could hide in shadows, pick pockets. And by default, that meant other characters couldn't, even if they had been doing so before the introduction of the thief. Now, there's some argument over those initial thief skills and what they meant. Hide and cover is different than hide in shadows. Sure, anyone can hide behind a big box, but only a thief could hide in shadows. Anyone could try and move quietly, but only a thief could move silently. And I like those arguments, but if we're being honest with ourselves, there were no mechanics to govern these mythical other abilities. Okay, so if a thief can hide in shadows and they have to roll a percentile roll to do so, how does anyone else hide? What are their rules for that? A thief needs shadows to hide in. Are there percentiles to roll for hiding behind? Are there percentiles to roll to try and move quietly as opposed to silently? I feel like the lack of those takes a little credence from that argument that thieves were special just by how far those abilities went, not so much that they were the only ones that had them. So by giving the thief these skills, by making them special, it meant other characters could not use them. Expressio unius es exclusivio alterius. The expression of one thing is the exclusion of the other. This principle has created a push and pull in RPGs throughout the ages. It's fun to give characters cool abilities. Who doesn't like getting cool new abilities? But by giving them those abilities, it means by default, other characters don't have them, or why does it matter? If you get a second attack at 5th level, it means before 5th level, you did not have a second attack. and that other characters also do not have that as a default. Granularity can be fun in a game. Just ask any Pathfinder player. There are so many abilities, and you get new ones with every level, and there are so many choices. And some folks, they actually like building characters more than they actually like playing them. And this very much appeals to them. I'm not one of those people, mind you, but I've met a good deal of them, and good on them. Whatever gets them rolling the dice. But on the other hand, there are games with less abilities and often less rules. Because you see, rules work the same way as abilities. If a rule says you can do something, it is often saying you can't do something else by its exclusion. Usually, these games rely more on the will of the GM. Can I sneak quietly? The GM has to either make up a rule or just say yes or just say no. And so it's not like these are two camps of games, it's a spectrum, right? And there's a tension between these two poles. And as a game designer, it's kind of a fun place to play in. Granularity, skill list, massive amounts of character choices, they tend to homogenize play. And this is why games of 5e and Pathfinder often feel pretty similar from table to table. It's by design. Telling people what they can do means that in any instance of the game, they can do those skills. On the other hand, there's the freedom to figure it out. So in games where there aren't as many abilities or rules, each instance or each table of this game might feel slightly different, but everyone gets to add their own flavor to it. They get to talk about how they want the rules to be interpreted, and the GM gets to make more rulings. And the GM is more of a designer, a game designer, that is, in these instances, because often they have to arbitrate things on the fly. Now, aside from being little gates that tell you what you can and can't do, and what others can and can't do, skills and rules and even items also tell you what's important in a game. If your game has a history check, for instance, it says that history is important. If it has a religion check, same with that. Notice that 5e does not have, say, a biology check, or a laser check, or a pet a kitten check. It's not to say that you can't do these things, or they might not fall under other checks you can make, but it does tell you where the priorities of the game lie. Look at a 5e character sheet and look how much of it is devoted toward combat, because that's what the rules support. And because they support that, even if they don't necessarily exclude other things, they're telling you that's what's important. Second edition D&D had a lot of granular. Second edition D&D had a lot of granular skills. They called them proficiencies, and there were weapon proficiencies and non-weapon proficiencies. And the non-weapon proficiencies, it wasn't just survival. There was fire building. There was rope use. There was reading and writing. And so even though in a lot of ways 5e is more granular than editions that came before, the skills in 2e were certainly more granular. But in a way, they also added more personality. I can remember a character that used their brewing skill quite often, and just because they had it, that meant that they, everywhere they went, they looked for fruit to brew into wine. And it really became a part of their character, and it certainly was not combat oriented. And so having more skills that deal with combat and less that don't tells you that you're going to do combat more often. But because there were more non-weapon proficiencies, players got lost in those as well. in a good way, trying to see what they could do to make money in the next settlement with their non-weapon proficiency, and they even gave directions to adventures as they had to sail ships worth of things across the channel to be able to use them to fuel their non-weapon proficiencies. And having them made them important. Having a list of items, for instance, and one of them is a cannon of giant killing. There better be giants in the game, or that's going to be really boring. So all of these things tell you what the game wants to focus on. A skill of rope use? By nature of having it on their character sheet, a player is going to look for reasons to use it. If rope use didn't exist as a skill, no one would likely ever think twice about it. Personally, I go back and forth. I like games all over the spectrum. But as always, knowledge is power. Realizing this spectrum exists means you can think about where you want your rules to lay on it, or even what games you like to play based on how they handle this dichotomy. And that's a skill in and of itself, right?